Professor Kazu, we may start now, because let them join in between.
Okay. Kazu, now I start. Yeah. A very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the esteemed members of ASPS and our honorable guests who have joined this program from all across the globe. First, I convey my gratitude to the office bearers and board of ASPS for reposing faith in me to carry on the activities related to the ASPS India office. I have been closely associated with the ASPS since the past 8 years and have been part of all the conferences. As the director of the ASPS India office, I will try to keep alive the great academic traditions that ASPS has set related to Persianate societies. Before we start the lecture, I would like to make a couple of practical announcements. Please use the question and answer function and choose all panelists to submit questions. The attendees may choose to address the questions to host or presenter, but they must address them to all the panelists. Otherwise, we may not notice them. Questions will be accepted until 5 minutes after the end of the lecture. If you want to pose a question but do not want your name mentioned, kindly state this in your request. This event is for viewing only. ASPS plans to publish the recording on its website. We have here with us today eminent academicians, Professor Mohammad Mia, who is the chair of this program, Professor Sunil Sharma, present president of the ASPS, Professor Kazuo Morimoto, the vice president of ASPS, Professor Joanne Gross and Dr. Gershon Leventhal of ASPS, and Dr. Balram Shukla, a scholar of Persian and Sanskrit, who is going to speak on the topic of morphological similarities between Sanskrit and Persian. I now invite the president of ASPS, Professor Sunil Sharma, who is professor of Persianate and Comparative Literature and convener of Persian and Hindi Urdu at Boston University, to give his opening address. Professor Sharma's areas of expertise are classical Persian and Urdu literature. He is on the editorial board of several peer-reviewed journals, and his publications are well known in this field. I hand it over to Professor Sunil Sharma.
Thank you, Dr. Farooqi. And good morning and good afternoon or good evening to you all, wherever you are. It is my great honor and pleasure to welcome you to this first virtual event that ASPS has organized for the next few months. As our communication indicated, the occasion for this event is particularly the official launch of the India Regional Office under the directorship of Dr. Salma Farooqi, who we know very well. As you indicated, you have attended more conferences than I have, and we have happy memories of the ASPS conference in Hyderabad in 2012. At this point, I'd also like to thank and welcome Professor Mia, who was our host at that wonderful conference in Hyderabad. And we hope to have a very fruitful and productive collaboration with the India office in the future. And at this time, I should also thank Professor Ishtiaq Mohammed Zilli, who was the past regional president. He continues to be in touch with us, and we all have great respect for him. This is, as I mentioned, the first of the virtual events that we'll be holding. For that, I would like to thank primarily Professor Kazuo Morimoto for his expert organizational skills in bringing everyone together. As well as other board members, Dr. Gershon Leventhal, Dr. Joanne Gross, and Dr. Daniel Bacon, who works ceaselessly behind the scenes to get things organized. At this time, we'd like to ask you to continue to support our events through the coming months, because as you know, given the state of the world, really, we can't say for sure when our next biennial conference will be. And hopefully in the near future, things will be better and we can again start meeting in person. But until then, we are fortunate to have this medium to create a global Persianate community and keep in touch in many ways that we were not able to before. And we have a whole series of interesting events lined up in the coming months and through 2021. So please support us through your participation as well as renewal of your membership, because we will continue to be strong and kind of persevere through these times. And finally, I'd just like to thank Professor Balram Shukla for agreeing to speak to us on such an interesting topic. We really look forward to your talk. And Dr. Faruqi will introduce our speaker next. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunil. Proceeding with the program, let me now introduce to you Dr. Balram Shukla, Professor of Sanskrit at the Delhi University, who is one of the foremost young scholars of Sanskrit today with an equal command over Persian, Prakrit, Hindi, and Urdu. He is also a poet and author, presently based as a fellow at the Indian Institute of Advanced Study, Shimla. Dr. Shukla is well known in India and Iran for his knowledge of Sanskrit and Persian. He often translates Persian poetry into Sanskrit in the same meter as the original. Dr. Shukla has translated 100 ghazals of Rumi along with several appendices directly from Persian into Hindi. Dr. Shukla's Persian odes have been collected in a volume which contains sample poems of 7 young Persian poets. Among the many awards he has received, he has been honored by Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the then president of Iran, for contribution to Persian literature, and has been awarded the Badrayan Vyas Award for Sanskrit in 2013 by late Pranab Mukherjee, the President of India. Dr. Shukla has also authored 8 books. Today, Dr. Shukla is going to speak to us about an interesting aspect of structural similarities between Persian and Sanskrit. He believes that Sanskrit and Persian have many similar words owing to their common origin. Today, he's going to introduce us not only to the beauty of both the Persian and Sanskrit languages, but he will also familiarize us to the rich literary traditions, translations, meaning of words, and basic principles of its grammar. I now hand over the dais to the chair, Professor Muhammad Mia, a seasoned and well-known academician in the field of education in India. Professor Mian has been the Vice Chancellor of not one, but 3 central universities in India, and has also been the member of the premier body of the University Grants Commission, and has been and continues to be an expert on numerous government panels and committees. Now, Professor Muhammad Mia will take over as the chair.
Thank you, Salma. Thank you, Professor Sunil Sharma, just introducing what is this is for ASPS, and then I now would like to request Professor Balram Shukla. He may start his presentation now, which will be followed by questions and then answer, and then we'll conclude it. Dr. Balram Shukla, please.
Yes, sir. Chaturmukha mukham bhujavana savadhup mama manase ramatam nityam sarva shukla saraswati beno mein khudawand janu khirad chazin bartarandi shibar nagzarat ishqam mudam ast az la'al dil khah karam bekam ast alhamdulillah. Respected chairperson of today's program, Professor Mohammad Mia, present president of ASPS, Professor Sunil Sharma, Professor Salma Farooqi, the vice president of ASPS, Professor Kazuo Morimoto, Dr. Gershon Leventhal, Professor Joe N. Gross, and respected listeners and viewers. I feel privileged that I have been invited to deliver this lecture on this prestigious platform of ASPS, that is, Association for the Study of Persianate Societies. I communicate my heartfelt thanks to all the members for inviting me here. It is also a matter of celebration that the ASPS's India office is being launched. I congratulate the officials, office bearers of ASPS on this occasion and express cordial gratitude for organizing my talk on this occasion. The topic of my talk is Morphological Similarities between Sanskrit and Persian. Morphology deals with the methodology of formation of words in a certain language. So my lecture would deal with the similarities of morphemes of both the languages and the method following which they get associated and make words which may function in a sentence. The relationship of Old Persian and Sanskrit literary tradition has been noted on cultural and linguistic planes. In spite of a huge gap of almost 1,000 years and drastic cultural and linguistic changes, modern Persian still bears astonishing affinities with Sanskrit on phonetic, morphological, and other linguistic dimensions. Persian has preserved the inflecting nature of ancient languages to some extent, which even Aryan languages like Hindi are lacking in. In this talk, I will be elaborating the extent of intrinsic similarities of modern Persian and Sanskrit with special reference to the morphology. It is interesting to note that various verbal and nominal morphemes and the suffixes thereof are still there in Persian. Today in our discussion, instead of counting similar words only, we will be analyzing the similar forms or the structure of the Sanskrit and Persian words through the use of morpheme constructs. Traditional grammars chiefly deal with the morphology. In ancient Indian tradition, grammar has been named as Padashastra, the Shastra which deals with the Padas. Padas are the words. So the Padashastra is the science of words. About the grammar, the great grammar of Panini, it has been stated that Paniniyam Mahachastram Padasadhutva Lakshanam. Panini's great grammar aims at analyzing the Sanskrit words. So morphology has to do a lot with the grammar. Panini's grammar aimed at morphological analysis of Sanskrit language also provides us with various insights for the analysis of its other cognate languages. Keeping this presupposition in mind, in our talk, we would use the categories of Sanskrit grammar wherever it is needed. Persian is one of the most cultivated languages in Indo-Iranian family. In many respects of morphology, it is not very far from the structure of many new Indo-Aryan languages, which are also called modern Indian languages, MIL, like Bangla, Kashmiri, and even Hindi. There are several historical, anthropological, and geographical reasons which account for this underlying similarity. The relationship of Old Persian and Sanskrit literary traditions has been noted on various dimensions. Comparative studies focusing on Avesta and Vedic texts tend to suggest that the springs of these great civilizations share common roots. Later on, the political and geographical contingencies led to gradual drift, causing gaps as well as misconceptions pertaining to these civilizations. Both in India and Iran, frequent interactions with alien cultures resulted in plurality and unique cultural transformations. Religious conversion has played an important role in subsequent socio-cultural development in these regions in particular. As a consequence, both the civilizations apparently assumed different forms on many counts. Now, they may seem to be drastically different from each other, but intrinsic similarities between them cannot remain hidden from the eyes of a linguist. As one of the Persian poets puts it, "Behar rangi ke khahi jama mi poosh, manandaze qadat ra mi shanasam." Behar rangi ke to jama bepushi, man mi tawanam tora beshanasam. So it cannot remain hidden from the eyes of a linguist, as I said. The morphological study of the languages is one of the ways to unleash this kind of mutual similarity. The vast grammatical tradition cultivated in Sanskrit may be of great help in finding out the similarities which the both languages share. Sanskrit language, owing to its comprehensive and scientific approach and its effective use in the ancient uninterrupted and copious literature, appears to function as a prototype for use in the context of Indo-Iranian languages. Very few languages in the world can claim to possess such rich literature with a simultaneous long and subtle tradition of grammatical analysis as Sanskrit does. Various distinctions of Indian grammarians have given scope for formulation of grammatical terms like root, morpheme, stem, case endings, suffix, prefix, etc. Even to the Western grammar. The concept of dhat, for instance, which is verbal root, that was introduced to Greek language only when Franz Bopp and other inspired by Indian grammarians did it in 19th century. The isolation of root from the word was really a revolutionary thought put forth by the ancient Indian grammarians. So Indian grammarians were the first to find out the roots, dhatu, which is called in Sanskrit grammar. On the basis of this only, different kinds of vowel gradation could be discovered and various suffixes and prefixes could be imagined. This is true not only with the Western grammars that they applied and they get these things, these terminologies from Sanskrit grammar, but the grammars of Arabic and Persian languages were also inspired by the Indian grammatical categories. It may seem astonishing, but it is true. There is a misconception that, like philosophy and medical science, the Arabs borrowed model and techniques for their grammar from Greek or Latin. It is a general misconception. This has recently been refuted by an Indologist of Iran, Professor Fathullah Mujtabai. He, in his book, and his book's name is Indian and Arabic Grammar, Terminological and Technical Affinities, Nahve Hindi wa Nahve Arabi, he has researched that the earliest grammarians of Arabic language were the Iranians, who were the inhabitants of Khorasan, which is very near to Kabul, Balkh, etc. And Balkh was a stronghold of Buddhist scholars. And in Buddhist scholars, the Katantra grammar was in fashion. And the Katantra grammar is very much influenced by the Panini's grammar. So they tried writing first grammars of Arabic, and those categories was transferred to Persian grammar in later days. These grammarians were well versed in Sanskrit grammar system or in the systems inspired by the same. If not Panini's grammar, then Katantra's grammar and other grammatical systems which were not very cumbersome were in vogue in Buddhist scholars. And after their conversion, they used their traditional knowledge in explaining the new language of their religion, which was Arabic. Sanskrit language has been intensely used to reconstruct the proto-language of all the Indo-European languages by the philologists. It is because of its archival nature and copious literature that Sanskrit has been able to fill the gaps in understanding the evolution of its cognate languages. What enables Sanskrit to be so important for the linguistic study is its continuous tradition of grammatical probing and deep analysis right from the Vedic period. This tradition of language analysis in India culminates in Panini's Ashtadhyayi, which is called which is always lauded by the scholars. Panini's work has been so efficient in analyzing Sanskrit that other grammar schools of his predecessors became outdated. Moreover, a huge literature was created as commentary and sub-commentary on Panini after his time, and this tradition is continuing till date. If Sanskrit could retain itself for millennia, even when it was not a spoken language, if the most ancient book of the India, the Vedas, and their archaic morphology could be preserved and was not lost in oblivion, most of its credit goes to India's intense grammatical tradition. Hague, Martin Hague, who was a great scholar of Avesta, has delineated the problems of Avestan study because of the absence of grammatical analysis, and lauds the fortune of Sanskrit language, which was blessed with grammarians like Panini. And I quote, "Much of the difficulty of understanding the Zend Avesta arises no doubt from grammatical defects in the extant texts, owing to the want of grammatical studies among the ancient Persian and Bactrians. Had the study of grammar as a separate science flourished among the ancient Mobids and Dasturs, as was in the case with Sanskrit grammar among the ancient Brahmanas, and had Iran produced men like Panini, Katyan, and Patanjali, who became lawgivers of the classical Sanskrit language, we should have lesser ground to complain of the bad condition of the texts and would have found fewer difficulties in explaining them than we have now to encounter." Thus, the well-knitted categories of Sanskrit grammar can be used while analyzing Sanskrit and Persian. This makes the analysis pointed and intelligible, at least for those who are aware to Paninian system. Now we are going to present some prominent points regarding the morphology, which, despite the gap of several hundred years, both Sanskrit and Persian languages share. So we are commencing our talk with verbal conjugations, which are called tingant in Sanskrit. So the root, the base for verbal conjugations are roots. The roots were discovered by Sanskrit grammarians, and not only from the days of Panini, but right from the Vedas. There is a Brahmana scripture affiliated to Atharva Ved, which is called Gopatha Brahmana. There we find the first mention of dhatu. He says that Unkaram Prichhamah Ko Dhatu. So right from the Vedic literature, Indians knew how to derive, how to know the root of any word. So we know that the concept of root, unknown to Greek and Latin grammarians, was introduced firstly by the Indians as early as in the Vedic period. Panini has enumerated a book, so appended an ancillary book to his Ashtadhyayi, which is called Dhatupath. Dhatupath means enumeration of the verbal roots. He has been successful in imagining that the verb consists of a root which is normally monosyllabic. So actually there has been a long tradition even before Panini. Panini is just a culmination of the grammatical tradition of India. So in all Indo-European languages, suffixes generally follow the roots. Panini has observed that many roots change completely or partially when a set of spatial suffixes follow. We will see that in Persian also the same rule holds good. So otherwise they remain unchanged. Even before Panini, the Yask, who is the writer of Nirukta, the book of exegesis, the books which puts down all the rules of Vedic exegesis, etymology. So Yask too, we find clear inclination of this phenomenon in his Nirukta Shastra. There can be seen that in Sanskrit, when a set of suffixes comes, then the verbal root changes its nature, its morph. For instance, there is a root pash yani to see, and it becomes drish when it comes to future tense. In present tense, it is pashyati. In lot lakar, which is imperative, it is pashyatu. In desiderative, it is pashyet. In past tense, it is apashyat. But when we come to other tenses, other set of suffixes, the remaining set of suffixes, we find that pash, we cannot make conjugations out of pash. We have to resort to another dhatu, another form of that dhatu, which is drish. So if we want to make a future tense, we have to make drakshati, not pashishyati, etc. So, and if we have to make a past participle of it, we have to make drishta, not pashta. So now we will see that in Persian also the same thing is extant, keeping this peculiar linguistic phenomenon in his mind. So Panini, instead of imagining two sets of dhatu, he has imagined two kinds of pratyayas, two kinds of suffixes. So instead of imagining two kinds of dhatus, Panini divides the suffixes themselves into two sets. The first he calls sarvadhatuka and second he calls ardhadhatuka. So the form of the dhatu followed by the sarvadhatuka has been enumerated in Dhatupath of Panini, while the other form has been specially enjoined to change in the Ashtadhyayi. So let us take another example of us. This is very similar to Persian. In the present tense, there is us. So there is us that remains unchanged when four kinds of suffixes, which are present, imperative, past, and desiderative, proceed, while it becomes bhu when remaining suffixes, future, etc., are added after it. For instance, we find asti in present tense, but abhut in general past. The same thing is there in Persian. We can see that we can make present forms with us. But when we are going to make a past, we cannot make a past by the using the root us. We have to take resort to bhu, which is bhu. We know that Mahapranas are not there. The aspirations are not there in Persian. So gha jha dha dha bha and kha cha tha tha pha, all these sounds which are which have aspirations are not there in Persian. If they are there, they are with affriction. So they are fricatives. Fricative aspirates are there, but not pure aspirates as Sanskrit has got. So abhut becomes Budh. Let us see. We observe that the similar phenomenon in Persian language. Also, the root as, to be, remains unchanged in present tense while it changes into bu in past tense. For instance, Budh. Great Hafiz writes that Gauhare makhzane asrar haman ast ke bud. Huqqaye muhribedan mehr nishan bubha ast ke bud. So ast in present tense and bud in past tense. Therefore, we cannot make forms with the root as in the past, similarly with the verb deh. So there are so many examples in Sanskrit and Persian also. There is a word deh. So mi dahad, and he gives, but when you have to express the past tense, the completion of the action, you have to take resort to da. You cannot make past with da. As Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi says, Buya sharab mi dahad ya mi zanad, kharbuz dar dahan makun. So mi dahad. But in past tense, an ke andad beshahan be gedayan indad, as Hafiz, one of Hafiz's best ghazals. Persian follows the pattern of Sanskrit in this respect, as it has inherited and retained this feature from its ancient sources. My explanations don't aim at proving that Sanskrit has got all these things from Sanskrit. Persian has got all these things from Sanskrit, but actually Persian has preserved and retained these features from the ancient source languages which were cognate with Sanskrit. So this should be kept in mind. We can cite several other similar examples of this nature. For instance, Didan and mi binad, he sees, but he deed. So Didamash khurramu khandan qadahe baad bedas. Didamash, I saw him. Dar kharabat mughan noor khuda mi binam. Vin azjab bin ke che noori ze kuja mi binam, as Hafiz uses it. So in present tense, it is mi binam. So Chashmadid and Khurdbin, we can see the difference. There are so many other examples also. Mir and Mur, Mi Mirad and Murd, as Hijratu Mi Miram. Chin and Chi, Shav and Shu. And we will say that Samprasaran would do. Sometimes Samprasaran does the serves our purpose, and sometimes we have to replace the whole morphology, the whole morph of the root. Zan is actually Han of Sanskrit. So it has, in Sanskrit also, it has got so many meanings. Han is to blow also, and Han is to kill also. And just like in Persian, Zadan. So Zad. In Sanskrit also, Hanti and Hat, Zanad and Zad. So Paz and Puch, Paz becomes Puch, Kar become Kasht. Umi Karet va U Kasht, ya Umi Kasht. Continuous past. So we can observe that this phenomenon takes place in two ways. Sometimes the substituendum is the thing which has to be substituted, which is called sthani in Sanskrit grammar. So those substituendum changes completely. For instance, di and been. Beenad cannot be used in past, while sometimes only vowel gradation serves the purpose. For instance, shav and shu. So what is difference between shav and shu? Shav is actually the samprasarit roop, samprasarit form of shav. It is very near to bhavati and bhu. Bhavati, it becomes, and bhut is it became. So bhavati and bhu is actually shavati and shu. Actually, shav root has been mentioned in Yaska's Nirukt. He says that shavatir gatikarma kamboje shveva bhashate. In 500, more than 500 BC, Yask says that shav is being used in Cambodia's Kabul. Perhaps that is Kabul. We can note that many of changes in root are examples of ablaut or vowel gradation, which Panini has discussed in detail in his Ashtadhyayi with the nomenclature of guna, with the and samprasaran, etc. Now let us consider whether it is really necessary to imagine two roots or two stems of a verb as Persian grammarians do. Let us take an example. It is notable that modern grammarians of Persian language consider kusht as a past root and kush as a present root stem. Sanskrit grammarians differ. So they instead have subtle division. They would say that in both the examples, only kush is the root. Ta is a suffix to denote completion. Ta pratyay is also there in Sanskrit. So while in kushat, ad is, so kush is root, and ta is a suffix to denote the completion of action, and ad is the suffix part. The type of analysis makes grammar more efficient, as we are saved from imagining two roots. Thus, following Panini's pattern saves us from considering two roots. So, as kushad and kush, there are so many examples. As chashme ma bepurs, kimara kimi kushad, jana gunaheta leo jurme setare nist, as Hafiz says. Only in some cases, substituendum changes completely, as we discussed about it, did and been. The pattern of augmentation of component before suffixes to is same in Sanskrit and Persian. Sanskrit grammarians call it the phenomenon of set and unit roots. For example, grihit, which is graft in Persian, is set in Sanskrit, but unit in Persian, because the augmentation e is not happening over there. In Sanskrit grammar, dhatus are divided into two kinds to explain the morphological phenomenon. In the first group, there are the dhatus which get augmentation e before the suffix. The second group comprises the roots which do not undergo this change. For instance, when we use the past suffix ta after the root char of Persian, it gets e and it becomes charid. But when we use the same suffix after kub or kush, they do not get it, the I augmentation, and the formation is kuft and kusht, respectively. So Persian grammarians derived the present root from the past tense. For instance, they find kush from kushtan or kusht. It considers the pre-existence of kushtan before kush. This way of analysis does not enable a person who is totally unaware of Persian language to generate Persian roots. According to the Sanskrit grammarians, the monosyllabic minimal morpheme must be the primary root. It is called present stem by Persian grammarians. Thus, the so-called present stem kush should be considered as a primary root. So now verbal prefixes for conjugations. So in verbal conjugation, we have two morphemes. The first is verbal root, and second is the second are the prefixes, verbal prefixes. So we use 6 prefixes in Persian conjugation to denote different persons in numbers. Out of them, at least 3 are very much similar to that of Sanskrit. Those can be seen as ad, and, and So mi charad is very similar to charati, and in Sanskrit, and similarly charando chara, mi charam and mi charand. So charati and charanti are charad and charand. And now a very important thing, we can observe an interesting phenomenon that the Persian language has preserved the inflecting nature of its ancestral languages. So Persian is not completely inflecting language like Sanskrit or Avesta or Pahlavi, etc. But it has preserved several features, several examples which show the things which it preserves from its ancestral languages as far as the conjugation is concerned. Even Hindi and modern languages have not been able to preserve this feature. For instance, in Hindi we say that vah charta hai, wo gaay charti hai. So it has been developed from the krdant basis, the verbal derivatives of Sanskrit, and not from the conjugations, verbal conjugations of Sanskrit, tingant of Sanskrit. Unlike modern Indian languages, Persian in many instances has not been isolating in nature. Moreover, we can see an astonishing similarity of the subjunctive mood of the Vedic language. This subjunctive mood is not there in classical Sanskrit also. This tense is called late lakar by Sanskrit grammarians, which is not used in classical Sanskrit. It has got various forms. One of the form is charati. So charati, it is benedictory in nature, in meaning. So meaning may he move. Or may he graze. In Persian also we find dast marizad. Even today, even modern Persian, we find that form. Dast marizad. But for instance, there are so many maqam asli ma gushaye kharabat ast. Khudash khair dahad. May God bless. May God give. Anke in imarat kard. Shakkar furush ke umrash daraz bad. Zindabad in Murdabad we say that bad is actually the benedictory form of buvad. So bad chira tafaqqudi nakunat tuti shikar khara. Now let's see the formation of future tense. In Persian, the formation of future tense is formed by using an auxiliary verb khastan, khahish, to wish. For instance, mi khaham, khalq na khaham guft. I will not say, I will not tell. So, ba khalq na khaham guft. It is thus a complex structure. In Persian, we can witness that it is a complex structure of indeclinable past stem and declinable present stem of the verb kha. In Sanskrit too, we find gamishyati, he will go, is gamishyati. It is also a complex structure. So gam and ish means to wish. Actually, in our languages, there were no future tenses at all. So it was a later constructed linguistic expression. So gum and wish, though Sanskrit grammarians won't license it, won't accept it, but it is a kind of construct, complex construct, which we can find out by comparing it with the Persian future tense. In English also, I will go, so will is denoting the wish. Formation of causative verbs are also in both Sanskrit and Persian similar. We apply qualitative vowel gradation or ablaut in the first or second vowel of the root to get causative verbs of the word. For instance, chalati, he moves, chalayat, he makes someone move. So khurdan and khurandan, mi khurad, mi khuranad, pathati and pathayati, karoti and karayati. So khabidan and khabandan, we can witness the qualitative vowel gradation here. Verbal derivatives, which are called primary nominal basis, there are so many similarities. In Sanskrit, it is called kridant. The Indian grammarians held the view that all words have been derived from verbal roots. It is their standard procedure to first identify certain verbal roots in a word and then use suffixes to find several derivatives. Apart from the conjugation, Panini uses the primary verbal stems to form verbal derivatives or primary nominal bases. These are derived from the verbal roots and further used to derive nominal declensions and secondary nominal bases. For instance, we get ravande from root rav, one who goes. And further, we find ravandegan or ravandetar out of it as derivatives. So kishande is derived from Persian root kish, which later derives the word kishandetar, etc. Just like in Sanskrit, as krish, Krishna we get from the word krish, the verbal root krish, and later it gets derived. We get krishnata and krishnatara, etc. derived out of it. So the formation of many types of verbal derivatives in Persian can be seen just as in Sanskrit. Panini enjoins two suffixes, shatr and shanach, which end in at and an, or an and an, to denote the agency, plus presents tends to get primary derivatives. For instance, in Sanskrit, we get two forms, kurvan and kurvan. He is doing. In order to make to express this sense, we can use kurvan or kurvan by using these two suffixes. In Persian too, we find the same two suffixes. Some examples you can see that ravande and davande. Actually, prakritization also should be taken into consideration when we are analyzing Persian, because it is the features of prakritizations are in abundance in Persian. So not only Sanskrit should be kept into mind while analyzing Persian, Prakrit, which were the Middle Indo-Aryan languages, they also should be kept in mind. So Ravan and Davan. So Ravan is like Kurvan and Ravande is like Kurvant. In Sanskrit, we find kurvan, but when we decline it, we find kurvan, kurvantam, kurvanta. And in Prakrit, we find kurvant. That is the counterpart of Persian, ravande or davande. Uftanu khizan mi ravam, harasan, mard bayad ke harasan na shavad. So harasidan, from harasidan, we get harasan. So gurizan or larzan or khahan, it may be noticed that the word ravande denotes an agent who performs his action in present tense. Now, there are two suffixes. There are one suffix, popular suffix to denote agency in Sanskrit. That is tara or tar, kartar, karta, kartaru, kartara. In Old Persian, we find several forms like this. And now, even in modern Persian, there is a word dadar. That is also in fashion, is still in fashion in Persian. This word is derived from the verbal root da by adding the suffix tar, just like Sanskrit. Kri and tar, kartar, datar in Persian. In Punjabi, they still use it. Kartar, for instance. Tar or dar. Though by incorrect etymology, many scholars confuse it with dadvar. But it is dadar, it is an agent. If we simply add a to the verbal root, the word serves to denote the agent of the action of that root. These forms are rare in classical Sanskrit and are in abundance in Vedic Sanskrit. So we can see that Persian, the analysis of Persian is very benefiting not only for the classical Sanskrit, but it leads us to Vedic Sanskrit also. Many of them are still in use. For instance, Juya, Dara, Mana, Gira. Juya is one who finds out, Mana, one who remains, Dara, one who holds, Gira, one who holds. And Dara ye Jahan Shud, for instance. So in Sanskrit, in Vedic Sanskrit, there are several words, several terms, Goja, Nrija, Da, etc. So these verbal roots, present same, without getting any suffix, can also be treated as infinitive, verbal noun. And in Sanskrit also. So Saz, Dar and Gir, Darogir, they serve as infinitive. In Sanskrit also, vid is also means the act of knowing and to know. Vyavahara vide, as Mammata has used. Sometimes these infinitives are derived simply by adding ta suffix to it. For instance, sacht, pacht, and tacht. In Sanskrit also, if you use ta, it becomes the infinitive. Hasitam, ruditam, vamitam, vamitam madhuram, rusitam madhuram, as Vallabhacharya has written in Madhurashtakam. There are so many forms like this. Nouns having the sense of accusative are many a times derived from the using ta plus ka in Persian, present root in Persian, while only ta in Sanskrit. For instance, zan kashud kushtayehu, it shows the accusative sense. Zan kashud kushtayehu neek saranjam uftadar. فاش میگویم و از گفته خود دل شادم بنده عشقم و از هر دو جهان آزادم. So گفته تا, and you see ha, the terminal ha is actually ka. Ka is the pratyaya, the swarth pratyaya of Sanskrit, which becomes ga, and after it becomes ha. For instance, bachcha actually was vatsaka, and ka became ga. It is visible when you write bachagi or bachagan. The gaf, the ka appears again. Madana bana hatopi hatah punah, as Kalidas said. Hata is actually a noun of accusative case. There are so many tadditas. Tadditas are called secondary nominal bases. So they're generally derived from the verbal derivatives discussed above. Sanskrit and Persian share several types. For instance, the very interesting suffix is ka. In Panini's Ashtadhyaya, we find so many meanings of the suffix ka, and all these meanings Persian has retained. For instance, the sense of being small. Bala is a child and Balak is a small child. So in Persian also, Pisar is Putra and Pisarak is a small son. Dukhtarak is also. Harinak, for instance, Harinak is deer. Harini is deer. Harinak in Sanskrit is a small deer. The sense of being short. Vrikshaka is a short vriksha, short tree. Payamak is SMS, short messages, payam. And Musa is Moses, but Musiche is a small Moses. Maulana has written, Agar Musi Niyam Musicha Hastam. I am not Moses, but I am a Musicha. I am a small Moses. Darune Sina Musiqar Daram. So derogatory senses are also there. Panini says Kutsite, Hrasve, Alpe, etc. So, for instance, Manavaka. Manava is man. Manavaka is bad man. And in Persian also, Mardak is, Mard is man. Mart, the same Mart of Vedas. Yo aryo marta bhojanam. So mart becomes mard in Persian, and when you use the ka suffix, it becomes bad man. Sympathetic in sense also, vatsaka, my poor child. Tiflak, for instance, in Persian we use. So ka, I'm skipping this. Suffixes denoting possession. So matvarthi, this is called in Persian, in Sanskrit grammar. So there are two kinds of man and van, buddhiman as in Hindi and balavan as in Hindi. So, but in Prakrit, interestingly, you won't find buddhiman, you will find buddhimanta, and the same buddhimanta is preserved in Persian even today. So, as I enunciated that Prakritization also should be kept in mind while analyzing Persian. So Danishmand or Aklamand. So this mand is actually mant of Prakrit and man of, in Sanskrit also, Buddhiman, Buddhimantau, Buddhimantah. Mant becomes, but in first, that van sometimes becomes van. Aisareban ahistiran aram janam miravat. Or on nazubazu tundiye nazubaze tundiye darbana marisus, says Maulana says. So Gauban, Pasban, Mehrban, all these things are belong to the same thing. So the suffixes showing inhabitation. So Shali, Gunardi, Rashtriya, one who resides in Rashtra. The same thing if you drop the ya, it becomes Kabuli and Kishwari and Agarantur ke Shirazi, one who resides in Shiraz. The ordinal numbers, all these are Taddhit Pratyayas, Taddhit suffixes. So Pancham is Panjam. Cardinal numbers are very much near to the Sanskrit, but I don't have to enumerate it, everyone knows. So, but ordinal numbers, for ordinal numbers, there are some suffixes. Saptam is Haftum, Dasham is Dahum, etc. So for comparative degree, we see that Shubha is Khub and Shubhatar is Khubtar. Now compounds, having different kinds of compound is a specialty of almost all Indo-European languages. I am just skipping this and coming to the attributive compound. So there are so many compounds which by the nomenclatures and terminologies of Sanskrit grammar, we can chalk out, we can single out very meticulously. For instance, Bahubrihi, which is attributive, which serves as an adjective to other nouns. In Persian, we have copious examples of these kinds of compounds. Some of examples are there, just Hamra, for instance, Khargoosh. Those who have the similar ways are Hamra. So this is Samho Rasta Jiska, for instance, Bahuvrihi. Khargoosh, Goosh, जिसके गोश, जिसके कान जो है वो खर जैसे हों. So Ahu Chashma, a special kind of Bahuvrihi we have which denote simile. The Ahu Chashma is the same thing, and in Sanskrit it is very much in fashion. For instance, Briganani, etc. Surkhru, even the Zardusht and Vistashp, all these things are Bahuvrihi. Rohitashva, for instance, in Vedic Sanskrit we find. Karmadhara is a compound which can be called a positional compound, where the constituent words are qualified and qualifier respectively. But in Persian, because of Arabic syntax, the order has been changed. In Sanskrit, we have qualified first Neel and Kamal, Neel Kamalam, Shita Sharkara. But due to intense influence of Arabic language and grammar, this specific indigenous order has been altered in Persian. Nowadays we know that Dukhtar is Ziba. We don't say Ziba Dukhtar, but Ziba Dukhtar was there in vogue in Persian in ancient days. Mard Buzurg, Madaragiti. Still, many compounds in Persian retain this order from its ancestral languages. For instance, Pir Zan. We don't say Zanepir. We say Pir Mard. Nilufar. Nilufar is actually Nilotpal. Nil and Utpal. So Ashik Pishayen. Tatpurushas are the compounds which connected, where the two words are connected with the signs of case ending, vibhaktis. In Persian, we generally find words in genitive case get compounded, and for this, izafat is being used. And it is also the influence of Arabic, Zanepir, Hitabeman, Midadeu, etc., on Dilbariman, Ahmad Bariman. This special word order is apparent influence of Arabic language, but still we can find a tendency of compounding in original Aryan order of Tatpurush in Persian. For instance, Danishgah, we don't say Gahe Danish, it is Danishgah. So it is the old fashioned, but still in vogue. Except this genitive Tatpurush, we can find several other types of Tatpurusha too in Persian language. For instance, Abalud or Mayalud, that is polluted by May. Hafiz Zakhud Napushi din Khirkaye Mayalud or Iftikharamiz. All these things are Tritiya Tatpurush, which is very much in fashion in Sanskrit. For instance, Nakabhinna, that which is torn by the nails. So Upapad Samas is very interesting. Upapad Samas, in Persian, just like Sanskrit, we find a special kind of compound where the first part is generally object, while the second one is the present stem in its crude form or with simple vowel gradation. For instance, Kumbhakar, Kumbh is in accusative case, and Kar is the crude form of the word. Karyakrit or Ved. One who knows Vedas is Veda is accusative tense and accusative case, and Vid is the crude form. In Persian also, if there are several linguistic peculiarities. So in Persian also you can say Dilbar. On ke dil mi barad dilbarast. On ke dil mi avarad dilawarast. So, Sanobar Kharam, onke misle Sanobar mi Kharamad, Sanobar Kharamast. Qayat be jilve sarve Sanobar Kharamima. So, Kuzagar, onke Kuza mi kunad, Kuza be wujud mi avarad is Kuzagar. So, use of prepositions are also there. I am skipping this because I am running out of my time. One of these features, for instance, pro becomes fara. So fara rasidan, fara giriftan. Zinmian hafiz dil suhtid, badnaam uftad. Uftadan is actually utpatat. And the metathesis is there. So uftad it has become. Manas on husne ruz afzun. Afzudan is up jayate. So up is their pratyaya, their suffix, which is called upasarg in Sanskrit grammar. So I'm skipping it, and now we're. Thus we can say the final word. Thus we can say that a morphological study of the both languages benefit the structural knowledge of the both. There are several ancient Sanskrit forms which are not in vogue even in Sanskrit, classical Sanskrit. Persian has retained it even today. For instance, mi barad in harati means to bring, but in Vedic language it was bharati, and that bharati is still retained in Persian as barad. And in Dilbar also the same bri is there. So bri became hri, bhar became har in Sanskrit, but it became bar in Persian. So, and karmi kunat, for instance, krinoti. Karoti is there in classical Sanskrit, but kunad is there, krinoti is there in Vedic Sanskrit. So from Krinoti, direct from Krinoti, we see that Persian has preserved. I don't aim to say that it has preserved from Vedic Sanskrit. It has preserved these forms from the cognate languages of the Vedic, which was Old Persian or Avesta, from which this Persian got evolved. So are some examples. Moreover, by considering the word formation in Persian, we also can unleash the methodology of Sanskrit grammarians. For instance, Panini imagines up to be the crude form of the water. From Persian, we find the clue that actual stem is ap, out of which they have got ab. We see that considering the process of Prakritization is must for analyzing Persian, we find several features of phonetic and morphological features in modern Persian, which makes it very much similar to modern Indian languages. The points of structural similarities between Sanskrit and Persian discussed above present the possibility of an interesting fact. It is that both the languages can be analyzed by similar grammatical device. Panini's system has been tested through millennia for learning and protecting Sanskrit language and literature. Application of the same model for analyzing and learning Persian language can benefit the learners hugely. So I'm grateful that this lecture was organized, and I thank all the listeners and viewers, especially the office bearers of ASPS, Association for Study of Persianate Society. I'm very much grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Balram, for a technically enlightening lecture. Now there are a few questions, so which I'll just read out to you, and so that I'll read it one by one. There are a couple of questions.
Okay.
Yeah. Professor Muhammad Mia, would you like to ask the question yourself since you are there on screen?
No. I thought that question should be asked at the end, you know. Not now, but since because I am chairing this session, and I will say, Dr. Balram Shukla, thank you very much for wonderful, comprehensive, analytical presentation. How Persian as well as Sanskrit, you know, they borrowed from each other, and you have explained it very gracefully, and on a great extent you have explained it, you know. And I would say, as in Sanskrit, if you don't mind, Balram, kim karoti? Okay, Salma, you can go ahead asking questions. If anybody else asks, I will ask the question later on, you know.
Okay. Dr. Balram, there's a question from Professor Sunil Sharma. He wants to know, were the Buddhist scholars of Khorasan aware that Persian and Sanskrit were related languages? Usually we hear that it was only in the 18th century that the Indo-European connection was studied by people like Khane Arzu in India and William Jones in Europe.
I think so that they were experiencing the actual linguistic environment of Sanskrit and Persian, and they were aware of this similarity, the affinity between these two languages. And unfortunately, we don't have any work regarding this, but for instance, very much before these Europeans and this Khane Arzu, the Parsis came to India and they translated their holy book in Sanskrit. And they translate Izad, for instance, Izad denotes God. And they translate it with Yajata. And Yajata is actually the word for God in Vedas, Yajata, one who is capable of being sacrificed, for whom we can sacrifice. So Yajaniya is Yajata. So this the very thing, the very term they chose for translating the word Izad shows that they were aware of the affinities between these two languages.
Okay. There's another question. That is from Professor Kazuo Morimoto.
Okay.
He says that I understand that writing grammar was not part of the major activities of Persian educated elites before the modern period. Why is it the case, especially when some earlier scholars in Khorasan knew the developed grammar of Sanskrit?
They developed the grammar of Arabic language, as I discussed. The Arabic for them was not their language. It was the language of the new religion they accepted, and for them Persian was their own mother tongue. Therefore, I think they didn't need any grammar of that language. Arabic was very essential for them to learn in order to read Quran and etc. So therefore they devised grammars of Arabic and not that of Persian. So they were the earliest grammarians of Arabic, as Fathullah Mujtabai discussed in his book Nahv Hindi and Nahv Arabi, and they were very much influenced by the Katantra grammar, the grammatical categories of Sanskrit grammar, which is not the grammar of Panini, but the grammar of Katantra, which was written by Sharva Varma, sometimes after Panini. So that grammar also is hugely influenced by Panini, but because Panini's grammar tells about the Vedic forms also, and it makes it comparatively cumbersome, therefore they devised another grammar. So many grammars were devised, were written in ancient India. Katantra was one of them, and Katantra grammar was a short grammar. The word Katantra itself means Ka is small and Tantra is methodology, the short methodology to learn Sanskrit, the short in comparison of Panini. So it was very much in fashion in Buddhist scholars, and also in Balkh and Bukhara and all these things.
Okay. I have a small question too. I was just wondering, though it's a related question also, why do you think that Turkish did not become as popular as Persian?
In India, or where?
I mean, you could take the case of whole of Central Asia, or even in all the regions where the Ottoman Empire was predominant. It's just a generally a related question.
This is a question for historians, but
I know.
I think because Persian people were very much cultivated in their, very much progressed in their culture, and in the whole Islamic world, Iranians were very much influential as far as the culture concerns of culture. So culturally, they were very much very rich, and because of this, the Persian language became very much popular in the whole area.
Dr. Balram, there are a couple of more questions from Dr. Gershon. He wants to know, would Professor Shukla please elaborate some more on the influence of Arabic? In particular, he noted that this affected the Izafe, and I would like to hear more about this.
There were two instances where I discussed about it. The first was in Karmadharaya Samas, the compound, oppositional compound, where the Aryan order of oppositional compound is that we put qualified first and qualifier after that. So, for instance, Neel and Kamal. So blue lotus, we don't say lotus blue. But in Arabic, it is totally different. Shaitan al-Rajim. So Rajim is actually, Rajim is qualifier and it is put after the shaitan. So shaitan is qualified. And this spatial order of compound, which was in vogue in Arabic, influenced Persian language, and Persian language, the compounds in Persian language were also put like this. So first qualified and after qualifier. In Sanskrit, in Hindi also, we don't say Sundar, Ladka Sundar. We say Sundar Ladka. So Sundar is actually beautiful, is handsome, or Dukhtar is Ziba. Ziba Dukhtar we don't say. But there are so many examples, so many instances which show that the previous or the ancestral order was that of qualifier and qualified. For instance, Pirzan, as I discussed. So Pir is the qualifier, but we don't say that Zane Pir. Everywhere we say that Dukhtar Ziba, but not in Zane Pir, not in Marde Pir. It shows that some words are still preserved from the ancient languages, and ancient compounding order is still, in some extent, preserved by Persians.
Thank you. There's another question by Professor Joanne Gross. She wants to know, what are the main problems in translating Persian poetry into Sanskrit or any other Indian languages?
I think it is easier easier than translating in any Western languages, because Persian is very much near to us, to any modern Indian language. For instance, Bengali or Hindi or all these things. In Sanskrit, the meters of Arabic, meters of Persian are very much different from Sanskrit. But as we know that in Indian subcontinents, we use a lot. We use these meters a lot. In Hindi, in Urdu, we have got ghazals, and in Hindi also, in Marathi, and in similarly in Sanskrit, in modern Sanskrit also, poets use these Persian meters a lot, because these meters are so much lyrical in nature, and Sanskrit, the vocabulary of Sanskrit is very rich. Therefore, it is not difficult at all in translating the Persian ghazals, but bringing the Persian ethos in Sanskrit is very difficult. For instance, Yusuf, there are so many talmihat of Yusuf and Zulaikha and all these things. You cannot translate it using Yusuf and Zulekha, because the readers are not acquainted with all these things. So you have to choose. You have to find out similar things, similar objects which are in vogue in Indian cultural ethos. So, for instance, there is a ghazal of Khaja Hafiz. So don't be sad, because Yusuf will come back. So if you, I translated it in the symmetrical version. Kul baye zan shavad ruzi gulistan ghammakhu. Yusufe gumgashte bazayat kan'an ghammakhu. Don't be sad, because Yusuf Gumgashta will come back to you. Someone is saying Jacob, that will come back. So if you have to translate it, you cannot translate it using the terms of Yaqub and Joseph. So I translated it using the same meter. Failatun, Ramachandra. So Ramachandra is just like Yusuf. He has gone, he has been banished and he has gone Lanka. So Eshatyayodhyam ma shucha. So you can see that Failatun, the same symmetry, the meter is the same, and but the cultural ethos, you have to use the acquainted, so that your readers would be communicated what you are saying.
There's a last question we'll take, which is a follow-up question from Dr. Gershon Leventhal. After that, I hand it over to Professor Mohammad Mia for his question and his address. Now, Gershon wants to know if I can ask a follow-up question. Did izafe, qualified qualifier, not exist previously in Indo-European languages at all before the contact with Arabic? If there are examples of qualified qualifier in Hindi, does this reflect Arabic influence there too?
Mm-hmm. So you didn't write the word in Hindi which shows the qualified qualifier. For instance, in Hindi, Makan Malik, we always say Sundar Ladka and Acha Admi. Admi Acha we don't say. So if you, so in Urdu, there is a huge impact of Persian, and Urdu has influenced Hindi a lot. I think in Hindi, it must have come from Urdu. If you write any word, we can discuss over it. Maybe after that, this session also.
Sure. Now I hand it over to Professor Mohammad Mia, and he would ask his question himself probably, and then continue with his remarks.
I have a very simple question, because I studied Sanskrit when I was in school, and it's really very, very important for me to listen this lecture by Balram, and I'm very happy that though it was very technical and I had to concentrate on many of these things, but I think one thing very obvious comes to my mind, you know, why the Sanskrit could not become the spoken language in India. This is the second question connected to this. Hindi is supposed to be driven from Sanskrit. There are other languages, I may be wrong, there may be other languages like Tamil also. I feel there's a lot of words we use from the Sanskrit. So these two questions, if you can answer, I will be very happy, you know.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for your kind words, sir, and thanks for chairing this session. Languages change. The answer of the question is that languages do change, and languages, the ancient languages, are replaced by new languages. So Sanskrit was replaced by Prakrit languages. Prakrit languages were also went into the oblivion or extinguished. So the question is why and how Sanskrit could retain for so long. The question is not that how Sanskrit went away from the general public, general people. General people, the general languages do evolve and do change. The change of language is just the rule of nature. Sanskrit, even when it was not, means there was a considerable time frame that where Sanskrit was spoken language. And if you go through the Panini's Ashtadhyayi, he mentions so many forms which are related to the Kuchao Bazar, all these markets and all the every walk of life. It shows that Sanskrit was there as a spoken language. But no language can remain as a spoken language forever. This is why Sanskrit also was degenerated, you can say, or it was replaced by the common language, the vernacular languages, and those vernacular languages also vanished and Apabhransh came, and after the Apabhransh, the modern Indian languages came. So it is the chakra, it is the circle which always revolves, and Indians could preserve the language, the Sanskrit language, and even today in India there are many people who can communicate scholarly things in Sanskrit, but it cannot be just like Urdu or Hindi or all these things.
So why I did ask this question, when I know Persian continues to be a spoken language, and those who speak as Persian, and Urdu as a combination, Urdu has borrowed from Persian and Arabic, as such, Now another thing which you have just mentioned, that Acha Admi. Acha Admi, when we say, Acha is Visheshana, Admi is Sangya.
Is Visheshana, yes.
Sangya. Which Visheshana comes before Sangya. Then you say Ladka Sundar. Sundar Ladka. Here, the Visheshana comes first and Sundar comes later.
No, Ladka Sundar is not used.
No, वो तो उल्टा हो जाता है. It becomes Sundar Ladka, So Sundar comes first.
So comes first, yes. Yes, this Sundar, I said that.
Since we are talking about
Sundar is not used in all languages.
These questions may have, when I meet you, I'll surely discuss with you. These are some of the things, because when I say Kim Karoti, still I use the word Kim Karoti with my colleagues, who know Sanskrit, somewhat Sanskrit, because I belong to Uttar Pradesh, and Uttar Pradesh mein Sanskrit padhai jati hai, the third paper in high school, Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. And I feel very nice to hear. And as Sanskrit and Persian, I think they are the language which have very ancient connections, And Persian, when we say Persian and Sanskrit, but I understand and I came to know that they are evolved in ancient adjacent provinces of Persia and Gandhara. I may be wrong and I may be right, This is for you. Now, keeping this in mind, that you have done very good analysis about the morphological or the structural analysis of the languages, and how one language has borrowed the words from the other language, that Persian borrowed from Sanskrit and Sanskrit borrowed from Persian. And very good analysis has been done by you. Second thing which is very important, that when I look from the point of view that these kind of presentations are very important for a common man also, who's not maybe expert in languages and other things, because that gives a very good understanding about what is happening. When I asked this question, I always wondered when I was in school, and we had liked Sanskrit so much. Why did it not continue as a spoken language? Like say when we translate from Hindi to Sanskrit, and like say we say Bhutkal, Bhavishykal, Vartaman Kal, then we say Ti, Tan, Ti, Sita, Tha, still I remember, still I remember. Meaning thereby that when I study Sanskrit, now I'm sure that many people who study Sanskrit, they would feel that speaking in Sanskrit gives a better feeling inside, feeling inside. Thank you very much for this is very important, and I'm really very grateful to Professor Kazuo and Professor Salma to organize such a presentation by Dr. Balram Shukla, and then we have really benefited by this, your lecture, and had created some kind of desire to know more about Sanskrit and Persian languages, So thank you very much once again, and once again I would feel that when the next lecture is organized on maybe in a given situation, it may be webinar, not necessarily face-to-face seminars. We will take care of all these issues, and I hope that we can, even for a common man, we can answer some questions like this here. Okay. Once again, I would feel that again, the Sanskrit and Persian, no, in dono ka koi wo nahi hai. There's nothing like this, how they have borrowed from each other, and one language from the other language, and this language from the other language, and then they are still continuing to use those words in the other languages. Thank you very much, Anna.
Thank you, Professor Mohammad Mia, for your remarks. I now introduce Professor Kazuo Morimoto, the Vice President of the ASPS, based at the Institute for Advanced Studies on Asia at the Tokyo University. Professor Morimoto specializes in the fields of religion and culture, social history of Islamic Iran, and socio-religious history of Muslim societies. Professor Kazuo Morimoto will now present the vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, Professor Faruqi. I hope you hear me. Hello, everybody. My name is Kazuo Morimoto, Vice President of the ASPS. I hope you've all enjoyed the event today. Dr. Shukla's wonderful lecture to mark the launch of our association's India office in Hyderabad. I also do hope that our amateurish handling of an online event didn't disturb your concentration on Dr. Shukla's lecture too much. This event, actually, and to tell the truth, was the first academic event the ASPS has ever held online. So we had the right to be amateurish. It is my honor and pleasure to give a vote of thanks for the ASPS to all those who helped make this event happen. First of all, of course, I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to Dr. Balram Shukla, who, in spite of his busy schedule, especially in the past few months, kindly accepted our invitation to give the wonderful lecture. I'd also like to thank Professor Mian for generously sharing his time with us to serve as the chairperson. It was a great honor for us to have you among us today. Professor Salma Faruqi has been the mastermind of this event. It was Professor Faruqi who proposed an online event to mark the launch of the India office to the ASPS and selected the most appropriate lecturer and chairperson for the event. So, thank you very much, Professor Faruqi, for your great contribution not only to this event particularly, but also to our association largely. Let me also wish you all the best with the activities of the ASPS India office, which I am sure will be an important hub of Persianate studies connecting the scholarly community in India with the international membership of the ASPS and beyond. On the ASPS side, I'd like to note especially the contributions by my colleagues in the working group for the virtual event series, Professors Joanne Gross and Gershon Lewenthal, and by our President, Professor Sunil Sharma, and Secretary, Professor Daniel Bevan. This event could not have taken place without your dedication. Thank you so very much. Let me also make two announcements before ending my remarks. Firstly, it is my great pleasure to be able to bring you the news of our second online event. As you see on the screen now, and that was my original plan, I am now a kind of out of mind, so I cannot show what I wanted to show to you on the screen. But anyway, we are holding a second event on December 22nd. Members of the ASPS will receive a detailed announcement by email very shortly, in a matter of hours, if not less. We are also planning a third event for March the next year. So members of the ASPS are welcome to join our upcoming events. I have a request for your cooperation. A pop-up window of a post-event survey is supposed to appear on your screen after the termination of this event, if it turns out that I have made the correct settings, of course. Please take a moment to fill it so that the ASPS will be able to benefit from your inputs in our upcoming events. The survey also includes a box in which you can write your comments to Dr. Shukla. In case no pop-up window appears after the event, you are most welcome to use the email addresses indicated in our announcement of the event. That is either Professor Faruqi's or my own email account to give us a feedback. Lastly, not least, I'd like to thank you all for joining us in this event and actively participating in the discussion. The ASPS virtual event series has just begun. I hope to see you again and again in the upcoming events online. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Kazuo. We have had an enlightening event and we end here hoping to meet again soon. Thank you one and all once again.
Thank you, Salma, very much.
Thank you.